You've hit play on the Screen Companion, a show about making your viewing time count. This time, we're talking about the magic of remakes with Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978, and Body Snatchers from 1993. The first Invasion of the Body Snatchers follows family doctor Miles Bennell as he discovers that plant pods are replacing folks in his small California town. The pod people claim that life is better without stronger emotions such as love, but Dr. Bennell and his lady friend Becky do everything they can to escape and get the word out. Fall asleep near a pod, you'll wake up a new person. Literally. Andrew, what were you left feeling when the end credits rolled on this one?
It was a classic 50s optimistic ending. As bleak as the movie could be, they made sure to put America first, and they gave us a good ending.
That happy ending, from the way the movie stacked everything up against Bennell, there is no way, if we look at it realistically, that they would have been able to button it up as well as they did. And it starts with him in detention, and a doctor comes to evaluate him and get his story. So then it's told in flashbacks with the voiceover of Dr. Bennell. I really wish they didn't do the framing device. I wish they didn't do the happy ending. And then I read up on it, and lo and behold, the producer requested that they add that framing device so they could do the happy ending. And I would almost recommend people, if they're watching 50s Body Snatchers, just fast forward through the very beginning, get to the part where he's in town being a doctor and nothing weird has happened yet.
I can agree with you to a point. I think either way works, because him being examined and then telling the story, I think you could cut that entirely out and then it wouldn't really make a difference. Or just move that scene towards the end of the film. But I think if they moved that scene to the end of the film and then he told the story and then the doctor was like, oh, this is a problem, it would just kind of feel anticlimactic. If anything, you should just end it on they're already here and just call it a day. Get rid of all of that stuff.
Yeah, I believe that was the original intention.
It would line up more with the 50s, so there you go.
And I knew I was in for a troublesome ride when the doctor goes to Bennell's cell.
Oh, where's the patient?
I hated to drag you out of bed at this time of night.
Will you let me go while there's still time?
You'll soon see why I did.
Doctor, will you tell these fools I'm not crazy? Make them listen to me before it's too late! I'll listen to you. Let him go.
Who are you?
I'm Dr. Hill from the State Mental Hospital.
I'm not insane!
Let him go!
And the guy introduces himself as a psychiatrist. And it's so freaking funny in 50s where Bennell just starts grabbing his hair. I'm not insane!
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Buddy, if you're trying to convince people you're not insane, don't say it like that.
Yeah. That's that classic 1950s acting right there. That's one thing I love about older movies. Actors and actresses, they were more trained for the stage, so they're playing to the back of the room, and so they do stuff like that. Okay, man, like, you're not doing yourself any favors if we're being realistic here.
Doctor, now you must listen to me. You must understand me. I'm a doctor, too. I am not insane. I am not insane.
Now, suppose we just sit down over here, Dr. Bennell, and you tell me what happened.
But was there a moment where you felt like you were really buying into the film, or a point where you would say you turned against it?
There isn't really a part where I get lost or get engaged, because I'm almost just studying it as a time capsule versus a story in a film. As a story, it's fine. It's a little wacky, but I feel like certain questions that I had with this movie were answered later in the remakes, because they were able to be a little bit more graphic. I don't remember at all in this one where they explained where the bodies went. They were just gone. But you see it in the other ones.
A movie definitely becomes significant once it's able to add a term or phrase to the lexicon. And I certainly have heard people talk about pod people before even knowing where it came from, and it came from this, and people still talk like that. So it left a mark.
It's just a weirder, more old school way of just calling someone a conformist. I have heard it in social circles as well, so it is interesting that that's carryover, is pod people.
I turned against the movie when Benel goes to examine a corpse lacking facial features and fingerprints at his writer friend's house. The way in which they proceeded broke my suspension of disbelief. They come up with two explanations for the body. They go, it could just be a random dead guy, or it has something to do with all the reports of loved ones acting strangely. So what's Benel's plan of action? He's going to go home and sleep on it. Call if there are any changes. Nobody in their right mind is going to believe that's an appropriate plan of action. Call the cops, burn the body, take it to Benel's office, lock it in a closet for later study, but everyone present thinks it's a good idea to leave the body unattended, and shocker, it disappears. There were some engaging moments after that, but the cap on its quality for me became clear at that point, that it was going to be 50 sci-fi cheese.
Well, absolutely. I feel like I'm going to be saying this every once in a while during this episode. I'm not the biggest horror film fan, although I can definitely appreciate them. And there are some excellent horror films out there that I would recommend to almost anybody. This sci-fi horror is not one of them. A lot of horror films, they need to have characters make these wildly illogical decisions for the plot to move forward. And that was definitely one of them. There were multiple moments in the movie where Dr. Benel was like legitimately leaving a lot of people unattended when they were at risk of being body snatched. You stick together, you don't let anyone out of your sight. He's like, you go there, I'll go do this, and then we'll reconvene. And it's like, well, of course they're going to be pod people by the time you reconvene. Everyone's out to get you. So that's a horror movie trope I don't like in general. You're right. They should have put that body in the morgue and done an autopsy later. But no, they didn't. We'll just leave it here. I'm tired.
And did I miss it? When Benel examines the body on that pool table, does he ever ask the writer, where did you find the body? Are we supposed to assume that the body just popped up on the table?
I'm going to assume that they found it in his closet and they moved it to the pool table. Because, yeah, it doesn't make any sense for it just to be right there.
But I would really like the doctor to say that on screen, just so I feel like he's a rational human being. Because that's what I would be asking. Like, where did this come from?
There's a lot of rational thinking that's thrown out the window in this one.
Tell us your favorite guests and what material you'd like us to cover next by emailing thescreencompanion@gmail.com, visit the Facebook group, or leave comments on YouTube. Support the podcast by subscribing and go to Amazon for the host's second novel, Self-Recognition, a futuristic detective story, available in both print and Kindle. Thank you to everyone stateside and around the world for listening. To foreshadow the 70s one a little bit, there's a lot of stuff in this particular film that is highly illogical.
I completely agree.
Which is too bad because I think it's a wonderful premise, which is why it's been remade so much. But to me, that's one of the facets of a good sci-fi story of the genre is to go, oh my god, this crazy crap is happening. What would I do? What are the permutations of what a person would experience and what they would figure out as to the solution, potentially, to this problem? I just can't play that game with this movie because nobody acts in a smart fashion.
One thing I don't like with any movie like this is when I have that moment of, oh no, that's not what you do. Not because you're thinking, oh, that's too risky, the odds are against you, it's going to work. It's just more like when you know it's not going to work. You know it's a bad idea. You go over there, I'll stay here. Like, no, dude. What are you doing? What do you mean you're going to sleep on it? There's a weird body morphing in front of you, and you're just going to go home? Like, even as a doctor or scientist, you should be fascinated in it. And he's just like, nah, I'm good. Y'all have interrupted my date too many times.
You must have found this pretty heavy-handed, and I realize I'm really hammering the one scene, because that is where I was on a downward slide after that. I have to keep talking about it. When he's sitting down with the writer friend and the writer's wife, she's the only one that's really freaked out about it. I'm with her. I think they should all be more weirded out than they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's her that starts this train of thought, but she goes, Doctor, how tall do you think that body is? Benel says, 5'10". How much do you think that body weighs? Looks like 140 pounds.
Yeah.
And then right on cue, the writer says, but doctor, I'm 5'10" and 140 pounds.
Yeah.
That the doctor could guess so exactly, you know? Not even like, well, actually, I'm 6 feet, but you're close. Nothing like that. It's like, oh my God, you exactly got my measurements. Which means, oh my God, that body's supposed to replace me. What do we do?
Well, I mean, he's a doctor, right? That's how you know he's an expert in his field. Show, don't tell, Frank.
He's really good. Take him to a carnival. He's going to win a lot of prizes.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Younger people that might be listening that don't know much about the 50s. Certainly you have the Red Scare, the Cold War, Hollywood blacklisting for supposed communist sympathizers. So the theme of paranoia and who can you trust was certainly topical when the flick came out. Besides that and the overacting, what else do you think about the 50s feels represented in this movie?
There's something about the small town vibe that they gave in the film. Even modern movies with a small town where everyone knows each other's names, they're not that friendly. I mean, at one point, it's like the morning after a night when they probably shouldn't have slept and left people alone. The doctor and they're in his home, and he hears a noise, and the gas man is just in his basement, didn't knock, didn't announce himself, just walked into the dude's basement, and he's like, oh, I'm here, boss, I'm about to leave, though. And the doctor was like, oh, you scared me. You finished your work, though. There was such an innocence about it. Maybe that was done very intentionally to emphasize American values, the nuclear family, against the pod people. You don't have that anymore. If the gas man just walks into your home, you're going to at least threaten him with something. You're not going to be like, oh, all right, Lou, thanks.
It almost feels like it could be seen as an indictment of small-town friendliness, because if pod people are trying to take over your home, it's easier if everybody already trusts each other to be able to abuse that trust.
It's hard to rank the settings by interesting. I feel like this one and the 78 version, their settings are on equal footing because they're so vastly different. But it does make it interesting that just everyone trusts each other. It almost makes more sense that people are catching these things. It seems like everyone can tell when someone else is weird and a pod person, except for the people where it matters most. Oh, that person might be a pod person, but not her uncle. She's telegraphing this, but we don't believe her.
How is he different?
That's just it. There is no difference you can actually see. He looks, sounds, acts, and remembers like Uncle Ira.
Then he is your Uncle Ira. Can't you see that? No matter how you feel, he is.
But he isn't. There's something missing. He's been a father to me since I was a baby. Always when he talked to me, there was a special look in his eye. That look's gone.
What about memories? There must be certain things that only you and he would know about.
Oh, there are. I've talked to him about them. He remembers them all down to the last small detail, just like Uncle Ira would. But, Miles, there's no emotion. None. Just the pretense of it. The words, gesture, the tone of voice, everything else is the same, but not the feeling. Memories or not, he isn't my Uncle Ira.
Wilma, I'm on your side. My business is people in trouble, and I'm going to find a way to help you. Now, no one could possibly impersonate your Uncle Ira without you or your Aunt Alida or even me seeing a million little differences. I want you to realize that. Think about it. And then you'll know that the trouble is inside you.
As far as I can recall, there weren't moments where they're trying to poke holes in some of these witnesses' stories as to why they think their friend or loved one has been replaced by a pod person, that they don't go, "What's wrong with you, dear?" "Oh, it's probably lady troubles."
That was nice, but they did essentially just say, like, he's not weird to me, you're crazy, you know? it's like, I know you live with him, and you said he's like a father to you. I see him every few months. I know better. You need a doctor.
They did backslide on the gender equality, I feel, when Benel and Becky are walking around and they're pretending to be emotionless so they can escape. And Benel says, "Okay, honey, you gotta clamp down on your emotions. These pod people don't have any, so we don't want them to know that we haven't been turned." And what happens? A dog runs in front of a vehicle, almost gets hit. And what does Becky do? She gets emotional and gasps. And then everybody's onto him. Oh boy, that feels very 50s. She's the one that gives it away.
And it was immediate, too. It wasn't even like they were walking a few blocks. Hey, keep your head on straight. And then just 10 seconds later, she shrieks and is like, "I'm sorry." Yeah.
But see, there's a lot of overlap. I was shocked how much overlap there is between these three versions. And all three of them used some variation of that moment. I'm making fun of the 50s, that, oh, this idea of gender. But what a missed opportunity in the 70s one when Brooke Adams shrieks, seeing another dog in another situation, which we'll get into. If you're going to give it away, that's the point of it, right? One of them has to give it away that they're not turned. Why not give it to Donald Sutherland? Man, woman, if you see a dog with that face, I would have shrieked, probably.
Yeah.
Why don't they equalize it a bit? Instead, oh no, she's the one that gives it away again.
Yeah, I think both of them should have yelled at that in the 78 version, because that was like, I almost shrieked when I saw it. I was like, the hell is that?
Yeah, we'll get to it. What was your favorite scene?
Arguably the most famous scene in the movie, when he's in the middle of traffic yelling about how they're coming to get us and they're already here, and that is very 50s. The way they shot it. And then that's where the Red Scare really came in, because that one part where he's just looking directly at the camera. They're already here. Like, you're not safe. What a moment. What a moment to almost end the movie on. To should have end the movie on. It encapsulated the whole film. That's a scene you could show to someone and they would be like, "Oh, this looks like is this that Body Snatchers?" Because, you know, it is kind of a movie that's so well known at this point. I think you could multiple choice it and someone would guess exactly what it was.
But how many people under 30 do you think even know about these movies?
Well, I guess under 30 is kind of unfair, but the 1978 version is memed a bit online, I see. The 93 one, I didn't even know they did a 93 version until this. I feel like this is one of those, by name at least for sure, that this is a more classic. They must still talk about the Red Scare in high schools, and I don't know why you wouldn't talk about this movie for part of the Red Scare, because this is Red Scare the movie. It was bad, and this was it.
If that scene was the very end, then I would agree with you. But like we've been talking about, they do a flash forward back, well, the present of him recounting the story, and it's a happy ending, blah, blah, blah. Because of that, I'm going to go with when Benel and Becky are holed up in his upstairs office, which to me seemed like the dumbest place you would go when you know there's a manhunt after you.
Yeah.
Don't go to your house. Don't go to your office. When they're in his upstairs office, they can look down at the town square. And I loved it when they're trying to suss out who's been taken, who hasn't. And then all of a sudden a bunch of people congregate. and you see the extent of it. To me, that was a great spooky visual because it just showed how far the pod people had gone, how futile it was becoming that they were going to be able to escape.
It just kind of begs the question, though, like, how long has that been going on? Well, I guess it doesn't matter because the doctor had just gotten back into town. So yeah, okay, never mind. I answered my own question. No wonder why he hadn't seen it before.
What are a few things besides that happy ending you think you would change to improve the picture?
If they explained it, I just don't remember, but I don't remember them explaining away what happened with the bodies other than they take you over in your sleep and you're just gone. That weirded me out. I didn't understand. Because they may have made a throwaway line about disintegration or something, but does the new pod person disintegrate you? Like, I don't know. I would just change the illogic in the film at times. It drives me mad when stuff like that happens in a movie where there's clearly a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, and for the sake of the plot, they pick the worst thing. And I get it. It has to advance somehow. You can't nip it in the bud in the first 20 minutes. You know, it would be nice to see something where they make the right decision, but maybe it is a futile decision and they're fighting against the inevitable more instead of where you can point and say they've given this a chance to succeed at every turn. It might be a much more downer ending for sure when you find out that the heroes were useless all along, but for something like this, it would make sense.
Miles, where do they come from? I don't know. If they are seeds or seed pods, they must grow someplace on a plant, probably. And somebody or something wants this duplication to take place.
But when they're finished, what happens to our bodies?
I don't know. When the process is completed, probably the original is destroyed or disintegrates. No, wait!
Sorry, but I take a dim view of watching my own destruction take place.
There isn't any danger until they're completely formed. We learned that last night at your house. Your blank didn't change right away.
Not until you fell asleep. Miles, when the change does take place, do you suppose there's any difference?
There must be. Wilma noticed it. So did little Jimmy.
So did I. My father.
That must be what he was doing in the cellar last night, placing one of these. I'm sorry.
I felt something was wrong, but I thought it was me because I'd been away for so long. They have to be destroyed. All of them.
They will be. Every one of them.
Whether it's futile or not, I couldn't help but think of John Carpenter's The Thing, because The Thing does what all three of these movies are really trying to do and make you feel that paranoia. The Thing, they give you all the pieces of the puzzle as far as what the circumstances are. I think if one were to pause the movie halfway through and just write down the details, they'd probably realize, oh, Kurt Russell isn't going to get out of this one alive. This isn't going to work out in the end. However, the struggle that he goes through, because you don't have a movie unless they struggle against it, right? So whether they can overcome it or not, they still got to try for the audience's sake.
I completely agree with you on that. However, I think my counterpoint would be, and it's been a while since I've seen The Thing, admittedly, but I find it hard for me to spot a moment in that film where they made, I would say, just incredibly wrong decisions. When I watch that movie, I think like, wow, like the alien just has the upper hand every step to where you truly don't know who it is. And really the only way to find out is just to torch everyone and just see what happens. Because I think that's a movie where they're fighting against circumstances, but they're kind of making great decisions every step of the way. It's just the nature of the beast is just that one step ahead. And it's the Thing versus a whole city that's being taken over. So I feel like you can still argue that there is that glimmer of hope. It's just one alien that you know of, I guess.
It's helped because of the details. Like you were saying, I would like to know what happens to the original people. I would like to know how close do you have to be to a pod? Because at a certain point, our dynamic duo, they're worried about going to sleep and being turned. Do you have to be right next to it? Do you have to be within 20 feet? Can you be in the next county?
Yeah, that was also strange. At least in the 93 version, you had to be within a certain proximity of the pod to be taken over. You could go across the city and sleep peacefully because as long as there's not a pod around you, you're fine. But with this one, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, how is it going to know if it's all the way across the city that you fell asleep? What's that about? That could have been explained more.
Because if you don't know the parameters of the disaster, there's no way to come up with a plan to contain it or to fight it. So then they are just running around like chickens with their heads cut off. That definitely hurt it. This being roughly 80 minutes, do you think that short length was a plus? It sounds like you would want some more scenes, so maybe you would want this longer?
Maybe like just an extra 10 minutes. You don't have to make it that much longer. Cut the beginning and the end off, the flash forward stuff, and give a little more information. End on the downer, who cares? But there are just too many questions. You don't know what you're dealing with.
For the level of complexity in the plot and the characters, I'm going to say 80 minutes is perfect. As dumb as it got in a few places, at least it didn't outstay its welcome or impose on my good sense for very long. At the end of the day, it feels like a middling Twilight Zone episode.
I will completely agree with that. It would have worked better as a Twilight Zone episode.
And I like Twilight Zone, so a middling episode of that, it's almost like I'm recommending people check it out.
Yeah, Twilight Zone's some great stuff sometimes.
The 50s original made a ton of money. They spent hundreds of thousands and made millions. Inevitably, along came a remake. Andrew, what's the 70s Invasion of the Body Snatchers about?
Essentially, it's pretty much the same premise, of course, but instead of a small town, it's San Francisco, and instead of a doctor, it's a health inspector for the city. And he's more lackadaisical about it for a while, but a coworker / love interest notices that her boyfriend is off. And that's when it starts. People are noticing that others are different, and progressively it takes over much slower than it does in the original. It's largely the same movie, just in a much bigger city, and the characters are tweaked quite a bit.
Hearing you do your little summary, it didn't hit me until just this moment that there's almost a connection between these first two movies and the first two Gremlins. You start in a sleepy town, and the next one, they have to amplify it by going into a city environment.
Oh my god, well, I mean, yeah.
Oh, and there are pods in Gremlins too, right?
There are pods, yeah.
For the 70s one, how did you feel when it faded to black? What were you left with?
I liked it more than the 50s one. It deals with the tension better. It's definitely a bleaker film. It didn't use as much illogic, I think, as the first one did. And there were a few reveals here and there that were, oh, a pod person that I didn't know about. I mean, you could guess, but it was still a nice little twist. It was very close to the 50s version on a larger scale with San Francisco, and I think just done smarter as well to make it more believable for the 70s audience, because the 70s is really when film started getting much more realistic. And so you can't have stuff like the 50s where people are acting that silly at times.
I don't know. There are moments where they act pretty silly in this one. For instance, the first body that Benel in this version examines at that bathhouse. Once again, everyone involved thinks it's a good idea to leave it unguarded. I'm not saying they should all jump to the conclusion that there's an alien spore invasion happening, but it's the equivalent of hit the killer on the back with a wrench and run away while he's disoriented instead of landing another blow on his skull.
Mm-hmm.
Because that scene, you got Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum, Veronica Cartwright. It's similar to the first movie where it's Benel, the writer, the writer's wife. And once again, their reaction to that body is so preposterous to me. Well, this one I understand a bit more, where Benel has to go check on Elizabeth, played by Brooke Adams. He's scared for her, so I get it. He leaves immediately. But the other two, they're there with the body, and Goldblum just wants to take a nap in the stall right next to the body. And they're like, yeah, that's okay. I'll go make a call, honey. You just hang out here with the creepy body that looks just like you. Why would they do that? If they're going for 70s gritty realism, I expect one of them to take a brick and just start smashing that thing's face in.
I agree with you, but I feel like the plan that they did give, although still wacky, it was more forgivable than the 50s one when they first found the body. Donald Sutherland is trying to check up on his lady friend. He did leave people with the body. Jeff Goldblum being unreliable, that's just him being unreliable.
They're casting aspersions at writers.
Yeah. The fact that they just left the window open for it to run out of, that bothers me too. Because, like, the transformation didn't take place. So what body was that? It just left, but, like, who was it? By the movie's logic, it doesn't snatch a body unless it kills the other person. What the hell was that?
If I try to give it an explanation, because we're still talking about the bathhouse scene, right?
Yes.
They clearly do a close-up on the face, and at a certain point, it looks like Jeff Goldblum. But to your point, it doesn't fit what I think the logic is supposed to be, which is it only forms the body as you're sleeping so that once it's fully formed, it can take all your memories and everything and turn you into a husk. That hadn't happened with Jeff Goldblum, the real Jeff.
I don't know, Matthew. I called you here as a friend.
Oh,
you know.
Jack.
Do you report certain things when you run into them, like contagious disease or a dead body in place of business?
Jack, would you let him look at it?
Found the body?
No, not necessarily. We didn't. No,
I thought it was Jack.
Is that him?
Yeah, that is.
What kind of joke is this?
It's no joke, Matthew.
What is it? What the hell is it?
Just keep calm, Nancy.
Keep calm.
Is it contagious?
Any of your customers seen this?
No.
It'd ruin us. It's all we need.
Look, I am calling the police.
No, don't do that.
Why?
Nancy, don't. Because I think Jack is right. Not immature, exactly. He's got an adult face.
It's a monster. It's got hair all over it.
It's vague.
Nose, lips, ear.
Hands, everything, but it's got no detail, no character. It's unformed.
Jack, don't touch it. You don't know where it's been.
No respiration.
It's got no fingerprints.
No fingerprints. Like a fetus.
You just said it was an adult.
I said it was an adult because it was tall. How tall are you, Jack?
6'4".
How much do you weigh?
170. Why?
Oh, no. No, Matthew. Oh, Jack.
So I'm going to assume that body wasn't formed enough to be able to move on its own. So I thought maybe Leonard Nimoy or somebody else did something sneaky and moved the body out. But even as I'm saying it, that sounds silly. It's the only conclusion I can come to.
Yeah, no, I guess you're right, but like he would have to have at least 2 people go through that window and sneak the body out.
It was a little window, too.
Yeah.
And no slime trail.
Yeah, nothing. That is the thing that's bothering me now that I think about it. It didn't bother me then, because I just thought, okay, whatever. The body has to leave for them to be like, where's the body? Because I knew that was coming. Is it just a half-formed body that just ran away? That does break the movie's logic. Unless it somehow just took the form only and none of the thoughts. But then how would it know I have to skedaddle? You'd figure it would just be laying there naked and just being like, what the hell is this?
Exactly, and it almost feels like the reason why it's written that way is to be closer to the original, which I think is a terrible way to do a remake. Don't go looking at what happened in the first movie and try to recreate some of it. Just make a new movie.
Well, I'll say that there were certain things that happened in both films that I appreciated seeing in the remake or like callbacks that I saw that were in the 78 and 93 version, where it was kind of nice to see like, oh, so that's how they're doing it this time. Like in the 56 one, they heard the choir. It was like, oh, let me go check where the music is coming from. And then it's a big reveal that it's just the pod warehouse. And then in the 78, it's Amazing Grace on bagpipes. That would make me stop and want to see what's going on.
In both instances, didn't it turn out to be on the radio?
Yeah, it was something like, it was just like radio music, but they were like, oh, I wonder what that is. And then,
yeah.
Because they were like, oh, music, why would pod people listen to music?
Earpod people would.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me have that.
He's here all week. They have to give the narrative a reason for the guy to go away from his lady love and let her fall asleep. And then the moment where they found the pods was very different in both movies, but the principle was the same, was they saw the pods forming bodies. And then, of course, the 56 version has the way that, and I'm sure it was shocking for 1956 when he pitchforked that one body, but then Donald Sutherland breaks the head of one of them.
Oh, yeah, that was wonderful.
That was wild, dude.
That was very 70s.
It was very, yeah, like, I don't know if you'll bring it up later, but let me just get ahead of it. This was such a hard 70s film, because it's like, oh, it's rated PG. Oh, okay, sexual content, violence, whatever. Thanks, Amazon, for letting me know. I didn't expect a whole lot. It's PG.
I think this goes to show that the MPAA can't be trusted, that they just willy-nilly, if they like you or not, that'll determine what rating they give. Somebody was sleeping at the projector when they're supposed to watch this movie. This is at least a PG-13. At least.
PG-13 wasn't invented yet.
Oh, that's true. I think it should be enough for an R then. You got nudity, you got violence.
I would say it's pretty extreme violence. It's a garden hoe. You see it going into a skull like, 2 or 3 times? It's really graphic. And then you have the boobs at the end of the film, and they're not like a flash of boobs. They're on screen for quite some time. Man, this is a hard 78 film. To jump ahead, that definitely made this feel like a 70s movie. I think doing a remake, you don't have to do an all-new film. I do like that they switched things up, where they're both technically doctors, but one's like a family doctor, one's a health inspector. You'd figure he's in more of a position to do something, and he's even talking about treating this as an outbreak or an epidemic and getting the government involved versus the general practitioner who's like, well, let's get out of here. And they definitely stuck with 70s era paranoia versus 50s era paranoia while maintaining certain moments of the original that they did a twist on, which was nice.
I've got one example I would like to put forth as to the pitfalls of not just having the overall premise being the same, but actually using key moments, for the most part, unchanged. It bothered me in the 50s one how quickly Becky turned. I don't know exactly how much time went by from when Bennell went to check on the music and when he came back. It didn't feel like very long, though. Like, how long do you think it took?
It wasn't very long. It didn't feel like a very long time. From the way they did the shot, I don't remember them giving you like a distance that you could rely on and time it in your head that he would be gone for half an hour or 45 minutes. It seemed like he was gone for like 10.
It feels like it didn't take nearly as long as the other people being turned.
I can give you that, but at the same time, this is one of those things where we don't have parameters, I think. For all you know, it could be just that instant.
It struck me the same way in the 70s one, where I feel like the instant she fell asleep, it took 20 seconds for her duplicate to get the better of her. And so the same negative feeling I got from that moment, feeling it was a little too simple for the drama, well, you guys lifted it from the 50s one, so it's the same problem again.
I guess I want to give the 70s one a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt. With the shipyard that he was going to, they gave us a little bit of a distance, and I feel like it felt like he could have been gone for about 30 or 40 minutes. Did she fall asleep with him there, or was she asleep by the time he got back?
By the time he got back.
Let's say he was gone for 30 minutes. She could have been asleep after like 2 minutes or something, because we also have to remember, they've been hopped up on speed and just running around maybe 48 hours at this point, because this one definitely had much more of a passage of time than the 56. Yeah, they're on speed or amphetamines or whatever, and then now she's crashing hard, and she's being left alone for like 30 minutes minimum. It didn't feel like Donald Sutherland was asleep very long when, during that pod scene, morphing when he was asleep. Because that kind of felt like real time.
It's hard to nail it down exactly. It could have been something of a time lapse from when he fell asleep to when it started to happen. I wish it was clearer with that type of detail. The 50s and 70s one, and the 90s one, they also have a problem with how little people question whether somebody is really them or not. Once people in the story know that there's an invasion, in the 70s one, there's a scene where Bennell and Elizabeth are running away from their captors, and they meet Veronica Cartwright in a stairwell, which I thought was such a coincidence. I expected her to be a pod person, didn't you?
I kind of did, yeah. I thought they would just push her down the stairs.
But the scene plays out where the couple just immediately accept that, oh, she's fine. She has been outrunning them like we have. I thought as soon as Veronica Cartwright showed up on those stairs, they're trying to get out of there sneaky. They don't want anybody to be alerted to their escape. And she gave her little story of how she's been eluding them. I was hoping Bennell was going to kick her down the stairs. Because then it would have showed how frazzled and desperate they are. And we could have had the couple, as they're running past the body, they could be wondering, well, was she a pod person or not? And Bennell, like the audience, his reaction could be, I'm just not taking that chance anymore. That would have been fun.
That could have been fun. I think she showed emotion pretty quickly when she saw them. Didn't they figure out by then that like they're all kind of cold and unfeeling? Because I think she teared up a bit and was really happy to see them. If I noticed that, I might have been trusting. Because if he was going to kick her down the stairwell, he would have had to just done it on a knee-jerk reaction, I think, for it to make sense if he's just going to start taking no prisoners.
Well, this is where it would be a good time to bring up Leonard Nimoy as the psychiatrist.
Oh, yes, yes.
I like to read some Reddits about these movies, get a sense of what fans of it are talking about. And there's a big question, and I feel it too, of when exactly did Leonard Nimoy turn? Yeah, they say the pod people don't have extreme emotions, but depending on when Nimoy turned, maybe they can pretend to have those emotions. Really, they're not feeling it, but they could pretend long enough to dupe you.
I guess that is an interesting point. Probably the first time you see him, he's the genuine Leonard Nimoy. Maybe like the one or two times after that, he's still him, but I think he turned halfway through his tenure in the film. Maybe that one scene, maybe the scene when he gets into the car with all the other pod people, maybe that was his first night or first day as a pod person. It is interesting to think about when he turned, but ultimately I don't think it matters too much.
Except the implication of whether or not they can pretend to have those emotions.
I can't think of another time where that mattered through the rest of the film, that they were pretending to have emotions.
No, I suppose not.
Like, if after Becky turned, if she was able to trick Donald Sutherland a bit with some lovey-dovey stuff, then I think it would matter, but, you know, she turned and was just immediately like, all right, man, your turn. To me, I guess it just doesn't matter when he turned, it's just he turned.
The Becky analog, in this one, she's Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, yes.
So the decade of this release saw things like the Watergate scandal, an uptick in people reading self-help books with titles such as I'm Okay, You're Okay. OPEC instituted an oil embargo against the U.S. The early to mid-70s saw American agriculture boom. Does any of that feel present in this invasion of the body snatchers, or what else about the 70s feels represented here, besides the bleakness?
Sizably, yeah. It is a different kind of paranoia in this one. When I was watching this movie, I was trying to figure out what is it that they're trying to capture with this one, because the 50s is the Red Scare. All right, what happened in the 70s? And immediately what came to my mind was Vietnam, Watergate, and Nixon's war on drugs. And the reason why the war on drugs seemed like it might be this one, remember when Elizabeth was tailing Jeffrey and he's meeting people in the field? They give him a pod and he walks away like a drug deal. Thinking, is this really like an anti-drugs movie? But that exited my mind really quickly. Also in the analysis that I was reading, it pointed out that Donald Sutherland has a government job and he's useless. And almost every other government person in this film is useless. And so that would have been the general idea of the time, especially after Watergate. You cannot rely on the government to look out for you or actually just get anything done. The political undertones of it and the self-help, Leonard Nimoy, are definitely the big ones.
There's a penchant for the characters, the supposed learned characters in the 50s and 70s, and I guess a little bit in the 90s version, where characters are so dismissive of what could be happening, such as Leonard Nimoy's doctor. There's a scene where he's relating how he's got a lot of patients that feel like their loved ones aren't who they think they are. He actually says something like, it's a psychic flu or something. But he says flu. Bennell says to him, is it contagious? And Leonard Nimoy's character laughs. And to me, he laughed like he was being dismissive of it. And I'm thinking, well, but you just described it as a flu. It doesn't seem dumb to me that somebody listening would ask you, well, is it contagious? Because you called it a flu, man.
Yeah. A lot of the smart people in this movie. Well, actually, I would say just Leonard Nimoy and Jeff Goldblum were those stereotypical, I'm smarter than everyone. Especially Jeff Goldblum. He thought he was smarter than everyone. He was angry about it. Leonard Nimoy was pretty dismissive. However, he did have his moments where he was poking holes in their theories, which I think is kind of important for a story like this because it is so fantastical, this premise of like, oh yeah, these plants are taking people over. Or just the idea that even before you know they're plants, people are being replaced with perfect duplicates. I cannot explain how, I just know it's happening. That's pretty wild. The skeptic character being an intellectual, it's always going to be a trope. When we think of intellectuals, not always, but we tend to think of skepticism because when you're skeptic of something, you think about it more or you try to figure out, well, I don't think it works like this, maybe it works like this, and you might go out of your way to try to prove it. But yeah, he was very dismissive, but at the same time, he also poked proper holes in their arguments. So it makes the main character's plight even more serious because not only are they being dismissed, but they're also being told, like, this is pretty ludicrous. And you know it's ludicrous, so what are you talking about here?
I don't know when vegetarianism became popular, but I read an anti-vegetable sentiment in this film.
I guess, yeah.
Andrew, what was your favorite scene, character, or aspect of the picture?
It's going to sound weird. I feel like it was very close to the 56 version without being too close to the 56 version. Although there are the logical problems there, I feel like they did more to explain it and make it make sense to the audience as to why someone might act that way or make that decision. Also that they showed more about how the pods work. Once again, you need to define the parameters, as you put it, so that you know what you're dealing with. That was nice to see, like, oh, they disintegrate, you know, like that's, okay, there we go. That's what I wanted to know in the first one.
Oh, man. Which scene with the trash trucks, about how far into the story was it before you realized that all those big, weird dust bunnies in the back of those trucks were people?
To be very honest with you, it wasn't really until, like, near the end. Because I was wondering, like, why are they taking out the trash all weird?
Yeah, oh, it's so dark once you realize it, because they've just got, like, balefuls of it.
I'm going to be honest, like, it didn't click with me until the 93 version. where it was like they were doing that, because I just thought, oh, well, in the 56 version, when they did that town meeting and they were picking up the pods, they made it very specific. It's like, oh, it's 7:45 a.m. on a Saturday. In the 70s version, when I see the pod people going out in unison with their trash bags to catch the trash truck, I just thought, okay, that's just another way that they're pod people. They're taking their trash out at the same time. I never questioned why it was such a small bag. I just thought they were being weird.
I chalk that up to the first time we see Elizabeth's boyfriend after he's been turned and he takes the trash out as just being a little odd. I didn't think too much of it. But by the second time they showed the trash truck and I realized that there were more of those weird dust bunnies, that's when I was like, oh, that's what's happening. Oh no, somebody get a vacuum. And it could be me just being very silly, but I think it's such a missed opportunity. I'm pretty sure in none of the 3 versions we saw does anybody ever mention weed killer. Wouldn't you at least try it once you know they're plant people?
I would maybe try it on the pods, because the pods seem extremely sensitive. But I think they had the right idea in the 50s one where they just lit it on fire. That's more effective.
People usually have Roundup somewhere underneath their sink, you know?
They do, yeah. They totally do. Just spray them in the face and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm not saying it has to work, but just if you're trying to work out how to get through it. Because that was so funny, and I thought maybe that's one of the points, not intentionally, but I think you can read into it in the 70s version, how none of them have guns. And it's in San Francisco, and it's almost like a pro-gun thing of, well, you wish you had guns now.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Life would have been a lot easier for them if they just got a gun.
In the 50s version, too.
Yeah.
They don't start using guns until the 3rd movie.
Yeah.
Well, what are a few things you think would help improve this film?
They could have shortened the beginning a little bit. They did a lot of character stuff, I think, in the beginning of the film to kind of establish their relationship, which was nice, but also you would have kind of learned that as time went on. Donald Sutherland's character was pretty skeptical until much later in the film. It's almost like he saw the pod person, and that's when he was like, okay, now it makes sense. Because other than that, I mean, like, when that guy was hit by the car, saying, oh, they're here, which, if I'm not mistaken, was that the guy, was that the dude from the 50s version just doing that part again?
It was.
Yeah. Like,
you didn't recognize that?
I did recognize him, but I didn't look it up to confirm. But yeah, like when I saw him, I was like, that guy looks familiar. And then he was hit by a car. And so.
That's too meta, man.
You didn't like it?
I liked it only because I saw the 50s one and I got the reference, but I was of two minds. Yeah, I liked seeing him again and it was funny. Should I be laughing in the middle of this paranoia-fueled film?
I guess you're right. I guess that makes sense.
What a big wink to the audience.
Yeah. It is, but, also, this is a remake that's 22 years away from the original. It would have been nice for the parents and the grandparents in the audience. They would have been like, oh, I think that's so-and-so, and no one else would have gotten it. That's the moment for everyone to be like, that's the guy from the original. Because I watched these movies just back to back to back this morning and afternoon, so when I saw them, I thought, oh, that's fun. It did kind of take away from it a bit, but if I didn't know who that was, it would be pretty alarming.
A part of me thinks the movie's better if we think that that's the exact same guy from the first movie, because it had that happy ending. But you can't get them all. You can't get all the pods. So what if it's happening again decades later and he's in the middle of it again?
The guy has the worst luck.
The first one took place in California. Second one in San Francisco.
I did notice that they were both California movies. It would have been interesting if this was a continuation, but...
So maybe it's a secret sequel.
I think you could make the argument that it is.
A couple things that bothered me about this one. I'm not saying it would make the film a total gem if they fix these issues for me. First thing, just like the 50s version, Okay, the scenario of being replaced by pod people, stressful, horrific, sure. But just like the first one, the characters in the 70s version, nobody's bringing up how they should get evidence. Maybe keep the decapitated head of one of the pod people, take Polaroids. Anything is better than the health inspector Bennell saying, I'll call the governor. He has to believe me when I say alien plants are taking over.
God, when you bring up well, see, now I want to look up when Polaroid cameras existed. When were Polaroids invented? There wasn't a lot of evidence, but they tried to get that one guy to run an experiment on the goo. But of course, he was probably a pod person. Oh, Polaroids were 1948. Yeah, they could have totally done it.
Yeah, and these guys definitely had some money. Okay, he's a health inspector. Elizabeth works at City Hall.
He seemed like one of the department heads, too. He wasn't just a schmuck.
Exactly. San Francisco's a very artsy place. There's a lot of tourism.
He's a homeowner.
If you don't have a Polaroid, exactly, you don't have a Polaroid camera, go to the local store, get one.
I agree with you. There wasn't a whole lot of evidence being taken. That raises a very great question. Maybe that goes to that analysis that I read about how this just shows how useless the government is, and you just can't rely on them.
This is a busy lab, Elizabeth. We're not supposed to test flowers. They go to the Department of Agriculture.
We know where they go. I think this is our problem. I think it is affecting people.
How?
Look, Alan, I have already said that I'm going to do all of the testing. You don't have to lift a finger. Can I?
You've been consistently late, Elizabeth, and you're behind in your work. So I'll do the test for you.
Thank you.
It'll take 48 hours.
Alan, 24.
I can't understand why you've become so emotional about a little flower.
Hello?
Mr. Bennell?
Yes.
You're with the health department.
Yes, that's right.
This is Ted Jessup, the mayor's special assistant.
Yes.
You've come across something strange in the last few days?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to suggest that we meet in Union Square. We can't talk over the phone.
Right away.
This is Judy Hinkle, the mayor's special assistant.
Yes, my name is Matthew Bennell.
The mayor's in conference right now, but he wants you to know that Dr. Kipner called him personally to express his concern as well. And Mr. Bennell, we're asking for your discretion from now on because this whole thing might be abating.
Hello?
Matthew Bennell.
Yes.
I'm Michaels. I'm with the Federal Preparedness Agency.
Yes.
Now, these reports of strange, unexplained diseased bodies, my understanding is that you haven't actually analyzed anything. You have no tissue samples.
No,
Mr. Bennell, it does seem you're just winging your conclusions. Please keep an open mind.
I have no intention at all of...
Don't mention to anyone about duplicate bodies, for God's sake.
I was going to treat it just...
Excuse me. My other phone is ringing.
Yes.
This is serious business, Mr. Bennell.
Hello?
Is this just a case of paranoia, Mr. Bennell?
No.
We're synchronized on all that. What's it like,
You
Mr.
actually
Bennell?
seen anything?
We don't want to create a panic.
No.
We have the primary authority in this matter.
Here we are, laymen, and we're just like, get a damn camera. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. They gathered no evidence at all to do anything actually meaningful.
Kodak could have run a whole marketing campaign in synergy with the film. They're like, when you need to take pictures of evidence of pod people, make sure you got a Kodak handy.
Oh my gosh.
Another thing, maybe they are commenting on it in the film, and I'm not giving enough credit. But I don't like the city setting for the second film. Because once Elizabeth suspects her boyfriend's been taken, something's happening, we get more people around our two stars where they give them dirty looks, where they're staring at them longer than you think is good. There's a scene where Bennell goes to the dry cleaners. He hands his coffee-stained shirt to an old Asian lady, and then her husband comes out and says, "She's not my wife, something's wrong." And then Bennell looks at her, and she's looking from behind one of those flap walls, those vinyl flap curtains, and she's just giving him a dirty look. And I'm thinking, well, I lived in San Francisco. I know dirty looks from Asians very well. There's nothing about this that screams pod person to me.
Good. That's funny.
She's just a inner city old Asian lady who doesn't like you when you're not giving her money. It's that simple.
Didn't think about that.
And then they had more Asian people at City Hall when Benel and Elizabeth, there are scenes them walking in the hallways, and she knocks into a guy, an Asian dude, and then he gives her a weird look, and then he stares at her all the way to the elevator. It's San Francisco. He's just a creep. It's hard for me to think, oh my god, that camera's lingering on him. Ooh, is he a pod person? You don't know. It's like, well, no, he could just be an asshole.
I will agree with you to an extent, especially that one. The dry cleaner thing, I can suspend my disbelief on that because, like, even in a big city, if you have your usual places, if you're not an asshole, people will get to know you, especially business owners who want to keep you as a customer. I've lived in LA County my whole life, and there were at least 2 restaurants that I can remember, not just as a kid, but even going into adulthood, where, like, they knew my parents, they knew me, they liked us as a family. You know what? Like, if that was a pod thing happening in Norwalk, California, I might be weirded out by getting the dirty looks from Ho Ho China, which is my Chinese food place of choice. I
thought you were just coming up with a new racial term.
No, that's what it's called. I'm not.
Okay.
No, don't cancel the Screen Companion, please.
I won't edit that part out where you explain what you mean.
Oh no.
Just know that I could. I'm going to blackmail you.
Oh, you have all the power here.
All I'm saying is the contrast. It's better if it's a sleepy-eyed town. It communicates it better to the audience if it's a small town, because I've lived in a small town. People generally, I'm not saying everybody's a peach, people generally are more civil from what I've seen. So it is more alarming and more impactful when the barber all of a sudden is giving you a long stare, as opposed to just some big city environment where people are staring for no reason or because they don't like you all the time, so it doesn't read as well.
I can get where you're coming from, but I will give the big city idea credit where, as an audience member, especially as people who've lived in big cities, we may not pick up on those types of cues because, yeah, it's a big city. Like, is he a pod person or an asshole? Like, I don't want to say it enhances the paranoia of the film because I definitely get where you're coming from. But it does make it harder to discern who's a jerk, who's a pod person, who's crazy or whatever, because you don't know everybody. It's just, why is this guy staring at me? You don't know why. You're just kind of like, what's going on here? Wild stuff happens in cities. In terms of the scale of it, it makes it scarier because now it's all of San Francisco instead of a small sleepy town that by the end of the movie is going to be contained. How can you contain San Francisco? That's going to outbreak to the Bay Area real quick and take over California, where it's a small town. They can nuke it.
This is your host coming at you from the future. This conversation about Invasion of the Body Snatchers and its remakes was so abundant, it was too long to fit one episode. So expect part 2 in the next couple weeks, where we'll finish up by getting into the 1990s with Body Snatchers. You've reached the end of this episode of The Screen Companion. Thank you for listening.